Carey Nieuwhof is going to do some job just leading us through some important conversations and providing some framing for us as we continue to lead in a pandemic, continue to lead in social unrest, and continuing to lead in this digital space that many of us are unfamiliar with. And I just want to challenge you guys as you're listening, just really be thinking about what is the future going to look like for where you lead in a post-pandemic sort of reality, and what's going to be required for your leadership and your organization to pivot well, to rest well, and work hard, and understand kind of how you achieve that mission and vision that you have for your organization. I really am just so blessed and encouraged that we get this time with Carey. He's in high demand, so we're really grateful just to have this hour with him, and appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to connect with him as well. Hey, Carey.
Good to see you.
All yours, man.
Okay. Hey, really good to be with you today. Thank you so much for joining in. It's a great privilege to be with you. My name is Carey Nieuwhof. I know I probably haven't met most of you before, but this is a real opportunity, and what a strange year we're in. And I'll give you a little bit of background to some of my own story. So I came to what I'm doing now through a very circuitous path, and some of you probably have a very similar thing. Some of you are in ministry, some of you are in the marketplace, some of you work for the not-for-profit sector, and so I'm CEO of Carey Nieuwhof Communications. For 25 years, I led a church called Connexus Church, a North Point strategic partner. We are just literally right now in the final stages of completing the succession plan there. So I handed that off 5 years ago to a younger leader, and at the end of this year, I will be finished on staff at Connexus Church. So really exciting. I always thought in business, from what I've learned, that succession has been a huge challenge, and the same is true in the church. And you think about 3 levels of an organization, and some of you will be at all 3 of these levels. Level 1 is nothing runs without you. You're in startup mode. You can't even take a day off. It's so busy, etc. And then that's sort of level 1, and I've been there. And then level 2 is things run without you. Things run just fine. And you can take a week off, you can take a day off, you can take a month off, you could take a sabbatical if you want, and you come back in and the whole thing hasn't fallen apart. But very few organizations get to stage 3, which is things grow without you. And there's a big difference between things running without you and things growing without you. And so I handed things off at Connexus Church 5 years ago to my successor, Jeff Brody. And I'm really thrilled to see what's happened in the last 5 years. Church is bigger than when I led it. It's better than when I led it. And I think that's kind of the hope we all have for the organizations that we're a part of or that we lead. And that's freed me up to build into leaders. Prior to going into ministry, I was a lawyer. I was an attorney. I went to law school. That's what I thought I was going to do with my life. Best thing to come out of law school was my wife. We met in first year. And in the middle of law school, felt a call into Christian ministry, into the pastorate. That was really confusing to me because I don't really have the gifts for that. And finished law, worked for a year in downtown Toronto, got called to the bar, and then resigned and went into seminary. And done a lot of other things along the way too. So these days I spend a lot of time building into leaders. And I do a leadership podcast. I write on my website at careynieuwhof.com. I do courses and I do some speaking and write some books. So what I want to share with you today in the 40 minutes that we have together, and maybe we'll be done a little bit sooner, and then we'll throw it open to Q&A, is just sort of trying to make sense of this year that we're in. Nobody would have called this 12 months ago. I mean, you know how Facebook sends you these like 2 years ago and 3 years ago. And I'm like, that feels like a whole other world. Like I flew over 150,000 miles last year, just traveling around the world, building into leaders, speaking to leaders. I haven't been on a plane since March 10th. And if you would have told me that, I would have been like the most useless thing I have in my office is my super elite tag with Air Canada. It means nothing. I'm Toronto based. Like I don't fly anywhere. We've had to pivot to a 100% virtual organization. We were almost there. I've run a virtual company for 5 years with my little communications team. And shout out to Erin Ward, who is in Evansville today and helping out with the event. She's my podcast manager. But we have just a handful of staff that are distributed around Canada and the United States. But to even imagine January 1st that, I'm not going to be in an airplane after March, and we're going to be in this really strange, hyper divided, constantly changing world. I mean, nobody really expected that. So we talked a lot. Ross and I talked about what we could talk about today. And we decided that I wanted to talk about a little bit about mental health and how you're doing. I had a period, and we're happy to go there in the Q&A. I didn't need a pandemic to burn out. I did that all by myself without a pandemic. And in 2006, about 14 years ago, a decade into ministry, I went through the worst summer of my life and just hit a period of depression and overwhelm and exhaustion. And it was the most painful, probably 6 months of my life. And by the grace of God, kind of came out of it. And 2020 has been a really unusual year because you kind of see the world, spiraling out of control. And I work with a group called Barna in California. We're doing weekly polling on like leaders' mental health. And I was looking at those numbers yesterday, and it's astounding. Normally, 14% of leaders would describe their mental health as being, average or poor. And right now, the stat is 50%. So it jumped from 14% of leaders going, I'm kind of struggling, to 50% of leaders going, I'm really, really struggling. And so we can talk all about that in the Q&A. But what I want to focus on is how do you get through that? Like, what is some remedy? Because I think when the pandemic hit in March, and I would include myself in this, I'm like, it's going to be a tough spring. It's going to be a difficult summer. But it's going to get back to normal at some point soon. And I kind of thought, well, the fall we'll see some semblance of return to whatever. But now we're moving into this indefinite future. And one of my favorite leaders is a guy named Levi Lusko. And I interviewed him for my leadership podcast. He gave me my favorite metaphor for 2020. He said, I thought I was in a marathon. And I talked to him in the summer about this. He goes, I thought I was in the marathon. And I'm like, okay, I can run this race. It's hard. I'm going to make it. And then I got to the end and I thought, great. And then somebody handed me a bike. And then they said, after you're done biking for 50 miles, then you've got to swim. And he's like, I don't know that I have that in the tank. And so what I really want to focus on is I want to talk about what are some of the skills and the strategies and the disciplines personally, but also organizationally that can lead us into 2021 with some degree of predictability. So I think who's ever controlling the Zoom, if you could give me permission to screen share, that would be awesome. So as soon as I get that, I can switch to my slides, or I can also just talk. It's up to you. So if you can enable screen sharing, then we are all set. Give it just a second more. No dice. Can we do that? It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So it might be in your master settings. Anyway, while we're waiting for that, I'm just going to tell you some of the things that are on my mind. And if we get the slides, we get them. And if not, you're just going to get a talking head for the next 35 minutes. But I think the thing about crisis, and one of the things that I've learned, is that it's a revealer, and it's also, okay, now I can do it. Great. It's a revealer, but it's also an accelerator. So I want to talk about agility being a greater superpower than uncertainty. So crisis is a revealer and an accelerator. It reveals, you probably heard the Warren Buffett quote early on when Warren Buffett said, when the tide goes out, you can find out who's swimming with no shorts on. And I think that's very true. We found a lot of organizations that kind of moved into panic mode, a lot of leaders who weren't ready. Some of us got caught off guard without cash reserves and things like that. And we always think, one day there'll be a rainy day. And we kind of had personal rainy days in our lives, but nobody really had like a global moment like this that I think pushed us all to the brink. And so crisis reveals what's already there. My wife and I are doing a Q&A I think in a week or two, just to help couples through their marriage. And, like a lot of couples, divorce rate has spiked, addictions have spiked. So crisis is a revealer, but it's also an accelerator. It was a year ago this month, I released a course that I called an online course called the High Impact Workplace. And in that course, which is no longer available, I cast this vision that, hey, in the future, workplaces are going to go digital and virtual. And like some of your team won't be in your community. Now, I've led a virtual company and worked remotely for years. So I was talking to younger leaders who wanted flexibility and agility and all those things, and older leaders who are like, nope, you need to be in the office at 8 a.m. So I did this course, and it's like, hey, in the future, one day, people are going to work remotely. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden we were all remote workers. And so I think there's been a massive accelerant effect on organizations and all these trends that we thought, yeah, at some point remote work is going to happen. If you're watching what's happening in Silicon Valley, I was reading about Dropbox, like Dropbox is massively downsizing. They're going to a distributed workforce. So all these trends that were kind of lurking in the background are now like with us. And one of the big questions is, how much of that is permanent and how much of that is temporary? But regardless, crisis revealed a lot of things, accelerated a lot of other things. And in the midst of this, as we've got a little bit of perspective so far in 2020, we're 9 months into this crisis or 8 months into this crisis, I kind of see three kinds of organizations, and see if you, as you look around in your own field, in your own orbit, whether you recognize these reactions to the crisis as they've happened. So organization one is, I would call organizations that have failed. And there have been organizations that are really on life support right now. There are others that haven't made it this far. But I want you to think about, like, as the time continues, right? Like there's predictions now, and I get it because of lockdown. Like in Toronto, near where I live, they're saying 50% of all restaurants might fail. Like, can you imagine a city where half of the restaurants disappear? Or some of you might run gyms, and like, that's going to be really challenging. But it's not so much the industry you're in, it's the mindset that you have. There'll be some restaurants that don't make it. There'll be some restaurants that do. There'll be some gyms that don't make it, some gyms that do. In my own field, some churches that make it and some churches that don't, because crisis is an accelerator and a revealer. So what are the characteristics of organizations that fail? And I would say the key characteristic is inflexibility. It's just an inability to change. And so what I want to do with the three organizations is I want to share with you a kind of thought bubble around how the leaders inside an inflexible organization that probably is not going to make it. And listen, this is not just pandemic related. I mean, long before we had COVID, organizations, companies, churches, they closed every year. Like, there were companies that didn't make it. There were churches that didn't make it. But I think these are the characteristics, and crisis just accelerates it. So what does an inflexible leader think like? You'll find them saying things like this, like, no one can recover from this. Like, listen, this is impossible. We've never had a meltdown this big. Or just kind of asking this question. We've all asked it at different times, but they're still there. Like, why is this even happening? How can this be happening? Look, listen, I hear what you're saying, but this is totally out of my control. I have no control in this. These are factors far beyond my ability to handle it. And then sometimes I've heard leaders say this, look, the bigger players can handle this. We can't. We don't have the money. We don't have the staff. We don't have the expertise. And that's the mindset of an organization that'll fail. Now, remember, this mindset, this mindset from years in leadership. This was around long before COVID, but the principal reaction has been this: we just totally out of my control, nothing I can do about it. So the remedy, if you find yourself in that situation, or you have leaders on your team, or for any organization I would coach, I would say what you need to do is you need to practice leadership, not reactionship. Look, we were all caught reacting when this happened. Nobody predicted any of this, and I was as surprised as anybody. But this is a job for leaders to lead, not just react. And now we have months under our belt. So if you find someone on your team or some organization you care about in that sort of inflexible mindset that could lead to failure, then practice leadership, not reactionship. Okay, organization number two. And I think the majority of organizations are in this pattern right now. You haven't failed, you're not thriving, but you're going to survive. So those are organizations that survive. And what are the characteristics there? The key characteristic there is adaptation. Yes, we did change. Yes, we did change. We couldn't have in-person services, so we went online. We couldn't do sit-down dining, so we ended up doing, takeout or drive-through or delivery, or we finally got on Uber Eats. Or yeah, we pivoted to online. We had an online store and we're taking online ordering now. Or, in a gym, yeah, now we're offering YouTube fitness classes for a subscription fee. And actually, my wife took one of those this morning where her old trainer in person just kind of coached her on a Zoom call with some other leaders, in our family room. And so that's how she's doing it. So you adapted, and you made some adaptations. And it looks like, based on the current crisis and its indefinite timeline, that that's going to continue. So the mindset for an adaptive leader looks like this. They're asking questions like, well, when will things get back to normal? Okay, like I just, once we can get everybody back in the room, once everybody can sit down and have a meal together, once we can all work out together, once we can have classes, once we can get everybody back into the office because we got so much vacant space right now, all right, things will get back to normal. Or maybe you hear yourself or you've seen others say, we've made enough changes for now. You know what? That was enough change. The world is crazy enough. We're kind of done. And sometimes it's like, do we have to pivot again? Really? Like, didn't we get into a nice holding pattern here? You mean we got to change again? Or we need some stability. Like what we need right now in this moment is we need stability, and this is good enough. This is going to get us through. And you know what? Those organizations might survive. They might survive. They might make it to the other side of the pandemic. But then the remedy for that is to make another shift. And this is what I would suggest, because I'm interested in growth, not just survival, is to shift from adaptation to innovation. And there have been a few innovators along the way in the church world, in the business world. But I think most organizations, companies, churches have adapted rather than innovated. So there's nothing wrong with adaptation. It's just, what if you could really move your mission forward by doing innovation rather than adaptation? And then there's my favorite category. There are organizations that thrive. I got off the phone about an hour ago with a guy who actually helped me with a boat tarp. I'm a boater. And he runs this little like mom and pop shop. He's got 5 employees and he helped me so much. And I've got a barbecue cover. I'm a big green egger. If there's anyone else there, all right, we're friends. And I need a new tarp, and I can't find one that fits my egg and tarp cart anywhere. So I called John and I said, listen, can you make a custom one? He goes, Carey, I've got the biggest year I've ever had. And he's like, yep, we're just taking in more orders than we ever have. So he can help me out next year. But there are organizations, believe it or not, churches, not-for-profits, companies, restaurants that have thrived in the midst of the pandemic. And what are the qualities and characteristics of those? I want to suggest to you the key characteristic is agility. Agility, the ability to move quickly, the nimbleness, the quickness, the rapid response. And then the willingness to do that like over and over and over again. It's like, okay, well, this didn't work. What can we try? And what does the thought bubble of an agile leader, an agile organization look like? I think it looks like this. Our mission is too important to miss this. Look, this isn't working. Thanks for trying. Let's try something new. Okay, this is good. Like we're making some progress, but what could be even more effective? And then probably my favorite question of the pandemic so far, what does this make possible? No, actually, I can't get on an airplane now. We have a 14-day quarantine requirement, and I could, but I'm not going to quarantine. So, all right, what does this make possible? All right, so we can't travel. I can't be in Indiana with you right now under any reasonable constraint. But what does this actually make possible, right? So do you see the shift in mindset from organizations that fail to organizations that survive versus the organizations that thrive? And the thing that I would think you want to preserve the most is your mission. You know, when I was leading the church, our mission was to be a church that unchurched people love to attend. So it's really hard to figure out how to measure things online, but we probably have a record year in the books, and the giving would indicate that, and engagement would indicate that. And so our mission actually moved forward. You know, in my company, Carey Nieuwhof Communications, our mission is to help people thrive in life and leadership. And this has been a record year for us in terms of audience and in many other measures. So our mission is really important. No, I can't get on an airplane and fly 100,000 miles this year. But what does this make possible? How can we help even more leaders? So we launched, to replace the speaking, we launched a second podcast. I'm doing a lot of virtual events. We're looking at pivoting. I was supposed to speak in Australia. We were doing a 6-city tour in March of 2020. That got postponed to 2021. And I just got off a Zoom call with them last week. Because it's so tenuous with international travel, we're going to pivot it to a virtual event. So rather than, 3 weeks of my life and 6 cities, and if you know Australia, it's massive. It's like, I think it's bigger than the US. So you're flying from coast to coast, city to city. We're just going to do 2 virtual events. I'll film them here in Canada. And they're actually hoping to reach 3 times the amount of people and then to take it global. So it's like, what does this make possible? What does this make possible? Those are questions to start asking. So the remedy there is to innovate by focusing on what you can control, not on what you can't control. And it's very natural. And I've done this too. Like all these things, I can't make a pandemic go away. I can't make the culture change. I can't make the advance of post-Christian culture slow down at all. I can't change the airline industry. There's so many things. I can't impact government policy. But what can I control? And I think when you focus on what you can control, not on what you can't, you make progress. I love this quote from Henry Ford over 100 years ago. He said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And there's a lot of power in that. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Because if I think I can't, you know what? We just got to close shop. We're done. I don't know how anyone can survive this. I'm right. And if I think, maybe we got some opportunity. Well, perhaps I'm right. I just think that's a powerful quote. Agile leaders don't have all the answers. Like, I don't have all the answers. I don't know anyone who has all the answers. But they keep asking questions. They don't give up. They keep coming back to this again and again. And I'm going to show you a framework on how to do that before we're done today. So innovative leaders continually sacrifice their methods to preserve their mission. And what happens is your mission, in the case of the church, the mission's been around for thousands of years. In the case of a restaurant, it's like, people are probably going to eat 3 times a day. So that's the mission, right? To feed people well or create a great experience, or people need to move their bodies, or people need to find financial peace, or people need to buy clothes, or whatever field you happen to be in, your mission goes on because human needs are endless, but your method may not work, right? There's JCPenney and then there's Amazon, there's Sears, and then there's online marketing. And so what you'll discover as you look back over the last 20 years is lots of companies have gone bankrupt because they didn't change their methods. And in the process, they lost their mission. Great example is Kodak, right? When I was growing up, like Kodak was the king. And Kodak, a lot of people know this, but a lot of people don't. Kodak actually invented and pioneered the digital camera. But they made a decision. Adam Grant tells this story in his book, The Originals. They made a decision about 10 or 15 years ago that they were going to focus on print. And the thinking was people are always going to want to print their photographs, and we're the best print company in the world when it comes to photography. Now, what killed Kodak? It wasn't Fujifilm. You know what it was? It was Instagram. And Instagram killed them because they invented a whole other way to think about your photography. Like, who prints out photos now? I have a few in my office of my family and friends, but that's it. And Instagram came up with a whole new way, and Apple and iPhones and technology came up with a whole new way of the way we think about photography. And it changed the industry, and Kodak went bankrupt in 2012. See, and that's a thing. This is the hard part as a leader, is culture never asks permission to change. It just changes, right? Nobody said, hey, excuse me, we're going to change the way we do photography. Or, let's get rid of these video stores and we'll just go to online streaming with Netflix. And nope. Amazon Prime. No, culture never asks permission to change. It just changes. And so my job as a leader, your job as a leader, is to kind of get ahead of that, figure out how culture is changing, and then make the appropriate course reactions. And I love to think about it this way. Irrelevance is the gap between how quickly things change and how quickly you change. So things are changing pretty fast right now. And that's what happened to the church over a few decades, is the culture changed a lot faster than the church. So a lot of churches are struggling. That happens in a lot of businesses and industries. Talk to a taxi driver. I mean, things have changed rapidly. When Uber was launched out of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, totally transformed. Airbnb, real threat to the hotel industry, and they've had to adapt and figure it out. So culture changes quickly. It never asks permission. And so you have to change your model along the way. And if you look at the last 20 years, you can look at the last 2 centuries. Here's the model: disrupt yourself or be disrupted. right? There's a famous picture of New York in 1903, and it's all horse and buggies. And then there's that same intersection in 1913, and it's almost all cars and 3 horse and buggies. Now, if you're a carriage maker in 1908, what are you doing? There'll always be a market for carriages, but these days you're probably serving a royal family somewhere, maybe, as they go to Buckingham Palace. It's not going to be a future business. It's going to be a niche, a real sub niche. So you disrupt yourself or you be disrupted. And that leads us to the 30-day pivot. This is sort of the practical framework. And we wanted to put some bones on this. And I'm going to show you, this is the process that I've kind of used for a number of years now. But when the pandemic hit, my team and I had to pivot multiple times. And I codified what we were doing and some of the best practices I've seen in strategic planning, and put it together in this 30-day pivot framework. So if you think about how you do strategic planning for years, and we still did this, we did an annual planning session for 2021 last week with my team via Zoom this time. We didn't fly into a city for obvious reasons, but you kind of sit down, you kind of review the year, you do a SWOT analysis, you think, okay, what are our goals and objectives going to be? What are our tactics and methods going to be? Who's going to be responsible for what? And you kind of set the die for a year and you do it. And hopefully it goes well. Well, that doesn't work in crisis. And so this 30-day pivot framework, I think, is something that can help you be agile. Like, I don't know how many times we're going to have to change, but my guess is that we're going to revisit that strategic plan well in advance of November of 2021. Why? Because things keep changing. And so how do you change quickly and in a very simple framework in 30 days? And that's the idea behind the 30-day pivot. So step number 1, there's just 3 steps, is evaluate. And this is very similar, a much truncated version of what you would do at your normal annual strategic planning retreat. So evaluate, just ask yourself a few questions like what's working and what's not. So what is working? And this requires, and you know this as leaders, this requires brutal honesty. There can be no sacred cows, right? One of the things, I prefer writing to video. I can do video. I've done a lot of video, but my team said to me, Carey, like, who is left blogging anymore? I'm like, well, we'll have like 6 or 7 million people read my blog this year. And they're like, yeah, but everything's pivoting to video. So guess what we're doing next year? You can't have sacred cows. We're doing a little less writing and a little more video. That's what we're going to do. Okay, what's working? What's not working? And then you got to ask the more interesting question, why? Why is it not working? Why are people not printing their photographs? Why are people, when, I know the founder of Blockbuster, we become friends over the last few years, in the 90s, that was a genius model. But then high-speed internet came along, and Netflix, which was originally a home delivery DVD provider, said, well, we'll just deliver our movies without the DVD and we'll just send it directly to people's devices. And at first it was kind of wonky, and you can make the argument that Blu-ray was better looking than, standard definition or low resolution videos that you get from Netflix. But then eventually, you know what? The internet improved. The quality improved, and nobody cared whether you got slightly better resolution in a 4K DVD or, off of Netflix. You don't really care. Why? Because with Netflix, you're just like, click, and here we go. We're watching The Crown season 4. Okay. So what's working? What's not? What's working? What's not? Why? So that's your evaluation. And then where are we seeing traction and where have we lost traction? Because this is moving all the time. It's moving slowly in a normal year. These are not normal times, but chances are that you are picking up traction. Maybe you're picking up traction on social media, or maybe your email list is growing, or maybe you're seeing drive-through traffic increase, or you're seeing, wow, you know what? We're online on multiple platforms, but YouTube is really taking off, and it's our target demographic. And then where have we lost traction? Where are we losing traction? So I know there's a lot of church leaders on, but church leaders are shocked right now, and you can always find outliers. But the general trend is that if you used to have 100 people, now you have 36 in person. And how much of that is because of the pandemic and masks and, all of that? And how much of that is permanent cultural trends that got accelerated? I'm guessing that a lot more of it is permanent cultural trends that got accelerated than most people are. But if you're losing traction there, why are you losing traction there? And then the question is just why, right? Why? I know restaurants that have had record years. And what they've done is they've doubled down on their drive-through. They've doubled down on takeout. They've innovated in fresh areas. They've started cooking classes, et cetera. So where are you seeing traction? Because chances are you're seeing traction somewhere. And then where have you lost traction and why? And then what are the metrics telling us for real? And I know for a lot of people, this is the first year you paid attention to online metrics or website traffic or YouTube or, IGTV, actual metrics. And so you got to figure that out, but you got to set some benchmarks. And what you'll find with online is it's kind of a funnel. So we have the content that we produce in my company gets accessed about, I think it's over 1.5 million times a month now by leaders around the world. And that's great. That sounds amazing. But what happens is you create a funnel. So that's good. We want to see that number go up. But we also want to see our email list grow because that is permission marketing. Then we have an opportunity to talk to people. So we have 75,000 people on our leader email lists, and we try to communicate with them almost every day, giving them practical tips like this on how to lead in this environment. And then we have a podcast. So it's subscribers versus downloads and so on and so forth. And you got to figure that out. And you'll find, if you haven't done it already, within the next 6 months, you'll have some benchmarks, just like you did in the old model. And then just kind of look at those and say, okay, are we getting progress or not? Because the vanity metrics, like 3-second views on Facebook, it'll tell you, 15,000 people watched this video. It's like, yeah, for 3 seconds because they were scrolling through. You can't build the future of the company on that. So you got to say, what are the metrics telling us for real? Find some benchmarks and move out. So that's number one, evaluate. Number two, ideate. Okay, now we have an idea. What's working, what's not working? Where are we seeing traction? Where are we not seeing traction? What are the metrics telling us? How are we measuring? Now we got to brainstorm with some ideas. Okay, so over the next 30 days, we're going to try some new things. We're going to try to figure it out together, and let's go from there. So ask yourself again, okay, what is changing? What is changing about this? I'll give you some examples from my own company that I lead in a few minutes, but it's like, I remember when the pandemic started in the world that I'm in, which is church and business leader world, there were on the emails that I subscribe to, like webinars happening every single day. And so one of the first things I said to my team is, we're not going to do a webinar. And the reason we're not going to do a webinar is I'm getting 5, like, hey, sign up for my webinar emails every single day. I said, my guess is by May, a lot of the webinars will go away. The novelty will wear off. And I said, so when the fall comes or when things have settled down, then we'll look at doing an online event. And we did one in October, actually, and we're overwhelmed by the response. It was so encouraging. But what's changing? What's changing rapidly in the marketplace? What are our competitors, or I like Simon Sinek's phrase, our worthy rivals doing? They're not competitors. They're just awesome people you can learn from. What's changing? What are they doing? What are some of the best practices? Why is it changing? Why are things changing? Why are people afraid to come back to church? Why are people afraid to dine in? Why are people worried about personal shopping? Why are all the home delivery options escalating the way they are in our field, or why are they not? Why is it changing? And then this is really important. Why did the current methods break? Like when things are not working, when return to church is not what you hoped it would be, when dining in is not what you hoped it would be, when retail is not what you hoped it would be, why did the current methods break? And then what trends are we seeing for tomorrow? Where do we think this is all going? If you're going to plot a trajectory, what does that look like? And so you've got to ideate. And it's like, so what does this make possible? And so my team sat down after all the webinars died down and said, what if we do an online summit? And I said, okay, what have I appreciated and not appreciated about online summits? Well, one is, 3 days, 150 speakers. And I just thought, I'm never going to sit down for 3 days and watch 150 speakers. Like, as a leader, I kind of value my time at the level of, you can really do a calorie dense 90-minute event and get some top leaders and summarize it. Why don't we try that? So we said, okay, if we're going to do an online event, let's host it. Let's do 90 minutes. Let's get some of the top leaders I know. And it was on online engagement. That seemed to be a hole in the market. And so I reached into the creator of YouVersion, the Bible app, Facebook's one of their executives, and then a pastor in a rural setting who would not normally have a vibrant online thing. So I got Levi Lusko, Nona Jones, Bobby Grunwald together. I said, you want to put a summit on? So we did 90 minutes, 2 showings, and I thought we'd get 1,000 leaders, 2,000 leaders. Anyway, we got 14,000 leaders to sign up. We were blown away, broke all of our systems. We had to find new hosting and everything, but we tapped into a vein because we were willing to pivot again. And what trends are we seeing for tomorrow? So that was a case of bucking the trends. Let's do something that's different that will probably gain momentum. And that worked for us. We tried it, and we're going to do it. And then ask yourself, what does this make possible? No, we don't like the news. No, we don't like the P&L, but what does this make possible? Because you got to preserve the mission. And to do that, you probably have to change the method. So that's where you're brainstorming, you're ideating, you've evaluated already, you've got all kinds of new ideas on the whiteboard. Now you got to do this. You got to say, what will help us see better results in the next 30, 60, 90 days? And that's the idea of the 90-day pivot. You're not like, we're going to run with this until the fall of 2021. Well, what if you run yourself into the ground? You don't know. Things are changing so quickly. What is going to help us see better results in the next 30, 60, 90 days? So it's almost like a lab, right? Like this is agility, right? You're like, we're going to try some stuff. And if it fails, okay, we'll give it enough of a shelf life that we'll see if it succeeds. But maybe it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And then we'll review and we'll see whether it got us where we thought it would get us. And then your third stage is, of course, implement. Now, I've gone through seasons in my own leadership where I've been really good at ideating and really bad at implementing. Oh, yeah, we had that idea 2 years ago. What have we done about it? Nothing. You can't afford to be in that space in this kind of era of constant change. So you got to implement. So that means creating an action plan with team members and leaders who have clearly assigned action steps to implement your pivot. So create an action plan with team members and leaders and clearly assign action steps to implement your pivot. So Jake, you're going to be responsible for this. Aaron, you're going to rework how we launch YouTube videos. Okay, so Sam, you're going to be in charge of getting registrations for this online summit. So here's what we're going to do for our list growth for the next 30 days. So an action plan. Everybody's clear when they walk out of the room. And by the way, I should have said this at the beginning. All this happens in about a 90-minute time frame. You can do all 3 steps: evaluate, ideate, and implement within a 90-minute meeting. Some people have done it in 60 minutes or less. So this is not like a 5-day offsite retreat. And then decide on the metrics that will help you monitor progress and effectiveness. Is it number of people served in the drive-through in a 5-minute window? Is it average cost of delivery? Is it 10-minute views on your YouTube channel rather than 1-minute views on your YouTube channel? What are the metrics? And you will have to decide on that. Is it number of social media followers? Is it number of new email addresses? Like, what are the metrics that are going to help you monitor progress and effectiveness? Because otherwise, like sports, we do that. We know who won and who lost. It's never you wake up the next day. It's like, well, I thought this person won and I thought that team won. It's like, no. You either know or you don't know. And often in business, and particularly in ministry, we don't have metrics. It's like, well, I think it's going okay. No, you need metrics, and you need metrics that are specific to your field to help you monitor progress and effectiveness. And then you can see a lot of some of these ideas are very similar to the 4 disciplines of execution, the Covey book, but weekly meetings to track progress and next steps. So then you set up a weekly meeting and say, okay, Aaron, you said we were going to get that new YouTube channel uploaded. How's it going? Great. What are we seeing? How many views? How many 10-minute views? All right, Sam, you're working on email list growth. What is that like? How are you learning? So you do weekly meetings to track progress and next steps. And then you evaluate fully after 30, 60, or 90 days. So you come back 30 days later, 60 days, pick your number, and you just evaluate fully. So it kind of looks like this. This is the 30-day pivot framework. Evaluate, ideate, implement. Come back, what did we learn? Great. We got a lot of traction over here. We're going to keep doing that. We'll pour a little bit of gasoline on that. This didn't work. All right. Well, why didn't it work? What are we learning from that? You want to try it for 30 more days, 60 more days, or you want to shelve it and try something new? Or what if we change this, or what if we change that? So it becomes this virtuous loop. And again, don't think a 3-day offsite, think a 90-minute meeting, or even take your leadership team, executive team meeting, staff meeting, whatever it is, and just use this framework. So evaluate, ideate, implement. And I think this is the framework that's helped us pivot numerous times over the course of 2020 and actually find momentum. We're on course to have a record year this year in 2020 in terms of pretty much every department. And we're very excited about that. But evaluate, ideate, implement. I can promise you, if we weren't doing this, it would have been a very different story. So I want to show you, these are metrics from my company. This is email list growth, which is a key metric for us. Social media is one thing, but email is something that we really value. It's not controlled by an algorithm. It's a direct relationship with the people. We have a good list, a great open rate, and a good click-through rate. And one of our goals before the pandemic hit was to grow our email list from 55,000 people to 80,000 people by year end. Well, what do you do when you're in the midst of a pandemic and your whole model gets disrupted? So we did a 30-day pivot early in March, and we saw 100% growth. And all we did was we put in a little pop-up that shows up on our website that says, stay up to date with all the latest crisis leadership stuff. Boom, 100% growth overnight. Then a couple of weeks later, we decided to create a free course. And so we filmed that, we made some changes. We saw 400% growth in a 2-week pivot that we did. Then we came along and we launched the course, and we did some other things. We saw 1,000% growth after a 1-month pivot. So again, there were some other things we tried along the way that didn't work. And we're like, okay, every week we're meeting, we're reevaluating. Then again, in the fall, the timeline doesn't go that long. We found another 5,000 email addresses came in when we launched that online engagement summit in October. Again, that was brand new for us. So what we're learning is new things that provide high value, create growth in the area of email list growth. So we're on track now to hit or exceed our goal by the end of 2020. So in crisis, agility is ability and flexibility is a superpower. And so what I want to do, we're just about done the presentation, but I want you to think about the questions you want to ask. I wanted to really give some hope along the way, because I think if you have a framework like this, it's a lot better than just waking up every day hoping it's going to be better. And some of you will have great ideas on how to do this or how to improve this. But to preserve the method in uncertainty, continually reinvent your methods. To preserve the mission, I should say, in uncertainty, continually reinvent your methods. My guess is your mission is going to be here to stay. And if you disappeared tomorrow, there'd be somebody else who picked up your mission. Maybe you're in a field where there is no market for it anymore, but most of you are not buggy whip makers in the era of the automobile. You've got a really good product you believe in, a really good cause that you're committed to. What's broken in the crisis is your methods, and they got broken quickly. And some of our methods broke too, so we had to reinvent them quickly. So I got a free resource. If you're interested, you can get a pivot ready cheat sheet. This will have some of the ideas I shared with you, as well as a checklist for you and your team. And it's 3 keys to adapting to rapid change. And you can get it for free by texting the words pivot ready to 33777. So pivot ready, just the words pivot ready to 33777. So anyway, really, really excited to be able to share that with you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll open it for questions if that works.
Thanks so much, Carey. Appreciate your time. And we're going to take questions in here and also on Zoom. And while you guys are thinking of questions, I'll walk around if you got one here. If you got one on Zoom, we want you to put it in the chat and then we'll kind of address it. I'll address it. I'll just read it to you. But I'm going to start with one that we got from Jeremy Evans. And he texted it to me, so he kind of cheated. But anyways, here's the question. He says, yeah, I get all this is great stuff and epic, actually. It's what I need for my leadership, but I'm exhausted. Help.
Yes. We almost went in that direction, so it's fun to talk about that during the breakout. Well, number one, I think having a strategy like this is going to reduce your exhaustion. at some level. And this is tiring. I mean, by the time I got through to May, I was exhausted too. So I've been through there. I've learned a lot of things over the years about exhaustion. And probably my big insight for 2020 is when we're in a really difficult situation like this, we look for time off to heal us. It's like, if I can only make it till Friday, if I can only make it to the weekend, if I can get a real day off on Saturday. And what I've realized in my own life too is that time off won't heal you when the problem is how you spend time on. And a lot of us, it's the unsustainable pace of 18-hour days, 20-hour days. And so what I shared with you is sort of the meta solution. And I got a whole new book coming out in September of 2021. I can't wait to share with you about time management, energy management, and priority management. But number one, I would say stop looking to time off to heal you, because the problem is, let's say you took a sabbatical, okay? So you take a sabbatical, let's say there's no COVID, you go to the south of France, you eat, pastries every day, you have an amazing time, you're like, I've never felt better in my life. And then you get back into your church, back into your business, and you're on the hamster wheel, and a week later, you're dead. That's not a solution. And so what you have to do, the simple line that I've adopted over the last 15 years is live in a way today that will help you thrive tomorrow. What do you need to do in terms of sleep, diet, exercise, spiritual rhythms, relational rhythms, even in terms of what you say no to? Steve Jobs said, when he was asked about what he was proud of with Apple, he said, I'm more proud of what we just said no to than what we said yes to. And if your life is like mine, every single day, I have to say no to stuff that comes in. So it's developing, that kind of framework where you're just like, I got to say no. And I think by answering some of those questions, like where are we seeing traction? And then focusing on that, you'll start to see momentum. And there have been days this year where I've been really, really tired, but then I recalibrate quickly and it's like, what do I need to say no to? And I said no to a whole bunch of other stuff again this week. Why? Because I only have so many hours. So I don't know whether that helps at all. If you want a real quick hack, honestly, go to bed at 9 o'clock tonight and wake up when you're not tired.
That sounds really nice. Mm-hmm. All right, we got a question back here with Anna. All right. I'll hold it for you.
Oh, you don't want to sanitize it after?
Yeah.
How do you keep those weekly check-in meetings on progress from getting stale with the team? Especially virtually, it's like, okay, we're measuring 4 or 5 critical things, and every week it's like, well, here's the report out. Here's the report out. And it's like, okay, everyone, keep going. See you later. How do you keep those engaging and motivating?
It's a great question, Anna. I would say start by limiting what you're focusing on in that 30, 60, 90-day window to 1 or 2 key things. It's the Pareto principle. Probably 20% of what you're doing is generating 80% of your results. So I would narrow that. Secondly, I've led a virtual team now for 5 years and done a remote team a lot over the last 25 years. So here's our framework. We start with wins. So it's like, how do we know we're winning? So we'll read an email or pick a comment off social. It's like, wow, we really helped this person. And then what I would say is you have a format. So we adapted the 4 discipline of execution WIG meeting format, wildly important goal format. Some of you know that framework. It works really well. And we just try to stay positive about that. And we also have a lot of fun. We have a fun channel in our Slack. We have a fun little private group in Instagram where we share jokes with each other and memes with each other. So you're doing the best you can. And I would say simplicity is your friend. Try to find that 1 or 2 things that's really driving the mission forward. Focus on that, because if you try to do 10 things, you end up doing nothing well.
Excellent. Let's see. I think we got one. So Josh Case on the chat, he says pivots are necessary in crisis. However, they're also beneficial in the daily, weekly, monthly work life. How do you effectively pivot even when you are not in crisis?
I love that question, Joshua. I would say probably one of the things I've learned, I haven't thought about it until you mentioned it, is we would keep this pivot framework moving forward. I think we're going to do annual retreats, but I think quarterly tune-ups are probably a really good idea. And, I said in the talk, disrupt yourself or be disrupted. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But disruption was happening long before we got into COVID. I mean, the taxi industry is in crisis. The hotel industry is changing. Dining is changing. Everything's changing. And so I think organizations that don't know how to pivot, those three mindsets, there were companies and churches failing every year. There were companies and churches barely hanging on every year. What the crisis has done is accelerated that. So I think, yeah, by all means, this is a permanent framework.
Okay. We got any other questions coming in or out here that you guys wanted to ask? If not, I have one. All right, we'll have Bob Seymour ask a question here. I got it. You can't touch the mic. Yeah.
Take over. How do you, what are your favorite examples right now of a business and a church that has moved to the innovation stage? What are a couple of examples of business and church that you really have said, now that's a great pivot or innovation that's going to move into the next decade?
So in a business, probably what I'm pretty close to a particular Chick-fil-A operator. So the double, triple drive-through innovation that they've created, the second thing that they have done, and they're on for a record year, they're breaking records right now because they know how to deliver quality food quickly. And, you don't want to be in a drive-through lineup that snakes around the block and it takes you 45 minutes to get food. We did that recently with a restaurant locally here north of Toronto where we went out for dinner. And it was like you had to call them and then they said, well, actually use the website. Then you had to call them again. And I'm like, yeah, we're not eating here again. But that ability to move quickly, double, triple drive-through. And then the other innovation they did is Chick-fil-A is now starting to build their first stores, this could be temporary, without the children's play area. Because I think the thinking behind that is that square footage, that's valuable and expensive. Moms are probably going to be hesitant, like that question Anna had about, did you sanitize the mic? That is not going away after COVID, okay? If you've got some snotty-nosed toddlers, are you going to put them on a play structure as easily as you did pre-COVID? Probably not. So they're like, we can use that for other innovative places, mobile pickup, et cetera. So I see that in a restaurant. Donald Miller's Story Brand podcast talked to people who run the Can List high-end dining restaurant in Seattle. That is an episode worth listening to. They pivoted to done for you, like high-end delivered tablecloth, candles, food to your house so that you have a fine dining experience at home. Those are two examples. In the church world, I was texting this morning with a leader of a church of 3,000 on the east coast of Canada. And what he's done, he's got in-person open. It's a fraction of the people that used to be there, as is the case. But he's now got, I think, 1,800 people in home groups. And he is equipping people. I'm going to be writing a lot about this in the church coming into 2021. We have defined in-person worship as being in our buildings. I think in the future, in-person worship will be defined as being in microsites, in people's homes, in restaurants, and it'll be far more decentralized than it has been in the past. And I think church leaders who are realizing, oh, I can equip you in your home, I can equip you over here, and that counts as church. I see that as one of the few innovations I'm seeing in the church right now.
Excellent. Thank you. We got a question coming from Crossroads. Any tips for collaboration via Zoom? It seems to work well for highly directive meetings, but collaboration for creative thinking has been tough.
Yes, that can be tough. And I mean, they have features I haven't explored, from polling to raising hands to, breakout rooms and that kind of stuff. We've used Zoom. I think we started on it when we were in beta. So for us, it feels like a natural language. But I did our strategic planning and it wasn't perfect. I did it here. This is my office. I just had a whiteboard here. And I took notes, and like people joined us from Indiana, Florida, Nebraska, Toronto, and beyond. And we just kind of worked it through. I kept it short. So normally we'd have 8-hour days and long days. We did a virtual breakfast at 9 a.m. Then we had lots of breaks, an hour for lunch if people want to take a nap or relax or walk around. We gave people a gift card so that if they wanted to rent their own place, normally I'd fly people in and do that. It's like, here, or you can, nobody did. I'm like, you can pocket it for Christmas money if you want to. But if you want to order some really fancy food in, like we'd normally treat everybody to dinner. So we just used our imagination and it worked well. well. And I think the key with Zoom is time limits. Like, is it really necessary? Seth Godin, in his Akimbo podcast, has a great episode on Zoom and the future of meetings that I just listened to. It's like a month old, and that'd be worth exploring. There was another question here as well that we missed from, I think, Ashley. Whether you want to read it or you want me to read it?
Yep, go ahead, Carey. That's great.
It's just above. She says, such great advice. Listening to our body is important. Thanks for great work. My husband and I, Chuck, met you a few years back. Appreciate your podcast. We developed some mental health resources on Right Now Media. A struggle is investing money in the right places is to grow our online courses. Yeah, can I just say something on that for people who are trying to grow online? If you're trying to grow your digital presence this year, which I would assume most people are in the church or in the business world, there is so much focus on social media, right? And I want to be an influencer and everything. If I show you our traffic, like we'll get over 1.5 million content access points a month on our podcast, blog, and read emails. So little of that is from social. And the problem with social is that the algorithms are always changing. They're beyond your control. There are a few people who have built successful Instagram businesses, and I think you'll see those in the future. The hidden gem that no one's paying attention to, if you want to sell online courses, build your email list, build your email list, build your email list. Your email list is your direct relationship with customers. There's a guy that I've followed for a number of years. Our team has taken some of his courses too. His name is Ramit Sethi. So it's RAMIT SETHI. And I would subscribe to his email list just to see how he writes. Heads up, he's not a Christian. That doesn't bother me. Our mission is to reach people that unchurched people love to attend. But he is brilliant at online marketing, and it's not what you think. It's not like 30% off our course. In fact, my company doesn't do sales. I can explain that if anyone's interested. We never put anything on sale, and there's a whole philosophy behind that. So it's not like 10% off or act now. It's like permission-based marketing, what Seth Godin talks about. If you figure out how to do that, and you do that through your email list, you will be just fine in terms of selling your online courses. But doing it via social should get used for other things, to get people to know you personally, to get information out there. Most churches, frankly, use social as announcements. It's probably the worst use of social. So that's not what you want to do. That's not who you want to be on social, so build your email list. Any other questions?
Oh, we got one more in the back. Great. Thanks, Sir Dave.
Carey, can you comment on North Point Church, Andy Stanley, closing all the way? I mean, he was the first big time, I guess, to shut down and then planning to reopen. However, there's a lot up in the air about what's going to happen in January 2021 too. I know you're not here to talk about him, but I also know I heard him talk through on why they made that decision. Do they feel like they've made a good decision so far? And go, of course, yeah.
Yeah, well, I speak directly for Andy Stanley. No, I'm kidding. I don't. Okay. But I've known Andy for a number of years, and I've done a couple of interviews with him in the last few months, and one of them directly on that question. So, yeah, Andy seems very comfortable with that decision. And I think the way he would explain it in a nutshell, and again, I am speaking for Andy, so you can listen to my leadership podcast or Church Pulse Weekly to hear Andy in his own words. But the way I remember it is Andy is saying, I wanted to get rid of uncertainty and confusion for our staff. Like, are we going to open? Are we not going to open? And we're, by the way, Connexus Church, the church I founded, we're not open either for in-person worship. We're focusing all of our efforts online. What that buys us, and I'll speak at this point out of the personal experience we have, is it gets us at Connexus, and I would assume also North Point. I'm doing their staff meeting tomorrow morning, so I can ask directly via Zoom. I'm doing their staff meeting. I would think what it does for us is it gives us the ability to do one thing well. So we can do online well. We built our YouTube channel. We built out our digital delivery systems. We're running a marriage course right now that has 250 people enrolled. And we did the math. on how would that have been possible in our facility? And the answer is we would have had to do it over 4 nights, socially distanced, et cetera. Well, now we can do it in 2 nights. 250 people, no problem. The last message of my kickoff series, our auditorium seats 350 people. We had 3 locations pre-COVID. We'd see 1,500 people on the weekend, but my first message in this series got 15,000 views on YouTube in the first 24 hours. I promise you, 15,000 people don't attend anywhere in north of Toronto or in Toronto. So what that's done is it's given us the freedom to be able to do digital well. And what I found to a lot of people who are trying to do both is you end up in no man's land. You end up not really having the resources to do in-person well because it's so complicated, not really having the time or the resources or the expertise to do online well. And what we're doing right now at Connexus is we're pivoting so that half of our staff dollars will end up going into online in the future and half to in-person, so that when we reopen, we can do it well, but we're not going to sacrifice our online presence because almost everybody we want to reach is online. So hope that helps.
Well, Carey, thanks so much. We've got 2 minutes to spare, so we'll give you those back. But
well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for
joining. It's been a joy to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure to have you with us.